The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Westbridge Capital, casting a golden glow on the glass-walled offices of its executive team. The financial district of New York City was already alive with movement. Black-suited professionals rushing through the streets, coffee in hand, ready to seize the day. Inside the towering headquarters of one of the most prestigious investment firms on Wall Street, Rebecca "Becca" Sinclair sat at her mahogany desk, sipping her meticulously brewed espresso. At 50 years old, she had built a reputation as one of the best strategic financial analysts in the industry. For over 20 years, she had steered Westbridge Capital through economic downturns, market crashes, and high-stakes mergers. She wasn't just an employee. She was the architect behind many of the firm's most profitable investment decisions. That's why, when she was summoned to an impromptu meeting with Elliot Grayson, the CEO, and Miranda Patel, the head of HR, she felt a twinge of unease. Something about the hastily scheduled appointment didn't sit right with her. As she entered the sleek, minimalist conference room on the 47th floor, she immediately sensed the tension. Elliot sat with his usual smug confidence, fingers steepled together, as he watched her approach. Miranda, in contrast, avoided eye contact, her hands clasped tightly on the polished glass table. "Becca, please take a seat," Elliot said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. She took a slow breath, smoothing her navy blue blazer before settling into the chair. The silence stretched just long enough for her to know this wasn't just a performance review. Miranda cleared her throat and slid a manila folder across the table. "Rebecca, after careful consideration, the board has decided to restructure the leadership team at Westbridge Capital." Becca raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Elliot leaned forward, his voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "With the evolving financial landscape, we believe it's time to bring in new leadership, fresh perspectives, a more agile approach." Becca didn't flinch. She had been in high-stakes negotiations her entire career. She recognized corporate betrayal when she saw it. "You mean younger leadership," she said coolly, her emerald-green eyes locking onto Elliot's. Miranda shifted uncomfortably, but Elliot didn't deny it. "We appreciate everything you've done for Westbridge," he continued, his tone rehearsed. "And of course, we're offering a generous severance package, 6 months' salary, health benefits, and career transition assistance." Becca almost laughed. After 20 years of loyalty, they were offering her a golden handshake and a polite shove out the door. She glanced down at the folder but didn't open it. She already knew what it contained. "Let me guess," she said, tilting her head. "You're giving my position to someone half my age, probably from one of those Ivy League MBA programs, with 0 real-world experience." Silence. Then, Elliot smirked. "Darren Lewis will be stepping into your role. He's an incredibly sharp young talent." Becca let out a slow, measured breath. Darren, a 32-year-old investment hotshot who had been with the company for less than 3 years. She had mentored him, guided him through his first multi-million-dollar deal, and now they were handing him her empire. Elliot leaned back, satisfied with himself. "We know this must be difficult, but we hope you'll handle this professionally." Becca smiled. It was the kind of smile that made grown men nervous. "Oh, don't worry, Elliot," she said smoothly. "I understand completely." Relief flickered across his face, just for a second, and then she added, "You're making the biggest mistake of your career." Becca stood, adjusting her blazer. "If that's all," she said, picking up the severance folder with an almost casual indifference. "I have a few personal items to collect from my office." Miranda nodded quickly, eager to end the uncomfortable meeting. Elliot simply leaned back in his chair, clearly convinced that he had won. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Becca had already seen this coming. 3 weeks ago, she had accidentally received an internal email meant for one of the board members. It had outlined Westbridge's strategy to quietly phase out senior executives, replacing them with younger, lower-paid hires. Becca had been at the top of that list. She had spent the last 3 weeks preparing for this exact moment. Before they could kick her out, she had secured a deal with Lockwood Partners, Westbridge's biggest competitor, offering them a high-value client list and a strategic plan to undercut Westbridge's top investments. She had also met with several key clients, subtly preparing them for a potential transition should she leave the firm. By the time Elliot and the board realized what was happening, it would be too late. As Becca walked back to her office, she saw the familiar faces of her team, the analysts, traders, and strategists who had trusted her leadership for years. Some of them looked away awkwardly, already aware of the rumors. Others gave her hesitant nods, silently expressing their respect. She entered her office, closing the door behind her. The stunning skyline view of Manhattan stretched before her, but today it felt different. They thought they were discarding her. They had no idea what was coming. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to Lucas Shaw, the CEO of Lockwood Partners. "It's happening. My last day is Friday. Everything is in place." The reply came instantly. "Perfect. Contracts are ready. Let's finalize over dinner tonight." Becca smirked as she placed the severance folder on her desk, unopened. If Westbridge wanted to play games, they had chosen the wrong opponent. By Monday morning, they would be scrambling to contain the financial disaster she was about to unleash. And Becca, she would be standing at the helm of their greatest rival. Becca spent the next 48 hours executing a meticulously crafted plan, one that she had started putting together weeks before her so-called restructuring. She wasn't just going to walk away quietly. She had given 20 years of her life to Westbridge Capital, and now they were tossing her aside like yesterday's news. They wanted to erase her from the company's history. Fine. But she would make sure that when she left, she would take everything valuable with her: clients, data, investment strategies, and most importantly, the power that had made Westbridge thrive in the first place. By Thursday morning, Becca had carefully packed up her office, keeping only what truly mattered: her personal belongings, a collection of photos from company events, and a sleek silver pen she had received after closing her first billion-dollar deal. Her official work laptop sat on her desk, untouched. They could have it back. What they didn't know was that Becca had backed up everything important to a secure cloud server weeks ago: legal documents, key financial analyses, and market predictions that she alone had created. Her knowledge was the backbone of Westbridge's most successful investments. Without her, they were blind. But the real checkmate? She had already informed her most valuable clients of her departure. By the end of the week, they would follow her wherever she went. One of the most important players in her plan was Michael Hayes, a senior investment strategist she had mentored over the last decade. Michael was sharp, loyal, and just as disgusted by Westbridge's betrayal as she was. "You're sure you're ready for this?" Becca asked as they sat in a quiet corner booth of an upscale Manhattan lounge that Thursday evening. Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. They made a mistake underestimating you, and if they think I'm sticking around after what they did to you, they're out of their minds. Becca smirked, swirling the whiskey in her glass. Good, because by Monday morning, Westbridge is going to wake up to a very different reality. Michael exhaled slowly, then handed her a flash drive. Here, everything you asked for. She took it, sliding it into her purse without looking. Investment projections? She asked. Check. Current high-risk portfolios? Check. New client contracts that haven't been finalized yet? Michael's grin widened. Checkmate. By Friday afternoon, Westbridge still had no idea that their empire was crumbling from within. At 3 p.m., Becca sent an email to her most high-profile clients, thanking them for the trust they had placed in her over the years. She ended it with a simple but powerful statement. A new opportunity awaits, and I would love for you to be part of it. Attached, an invitation to a private event at Lockwood Partners on Monday morning. Within minutes, the replies flooded in. Where you go, I go. Send me the details. We trust you, Becca. Let's talk. One by one, the dominoes started to fall. By 4:30 p.m., Miranda from HR stopped by Becca's office with a forced, sympathetic smile. I just wanted to check in, see how you're holding up. Becca gave her the same polite smile she had perfected over the years. Oh, I'm doing just fine. Miranda hesitated, glancing at the untouched severance package still sitting on Becca's desk. I know these transitions can be difficult. Becca leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. It's funny, Miranda. You all act like you're doing me a favor, like I should be grateful for this opportunity to explore new directions. Miranda had no response. Becca stood up, smoothing her navy blazer. Well, I don't want to keep you, she said, gesturing toward the door. I still have a few things to wrap up before I leave. Miranda nodded, still looking vaguely uncomfortable, then left. The moment she was gone, Becca sat back down and checked her phone. A single text from Lucas Shaw, CEO of Lockwood Partners. Monday is locked in. We're ready. Becca allowed herself a slow, satisfied smile. Let the games begin. By Monday morning, the financial district was waking up to a bombshell announcement. But Westbridge Capital wasn't aware of it yet. At precisely 7 a.m., Lockwood Partners released a high-profile press statement. Lockwood Partners welcomes Rebecca Sinclair as Chief Strategic Officer. A new era of financial excellence begins. Along with the announcement came a list of elite clients who had decided to move their portfolios over to Lockwood. Becca sat in her new sunlit corner office, sipping her coffee, watching as the story spread like wildfire across industry news outlets. Westbridge's most valuable clients were jumping ship, one after another. She smirked as she imagined Elliot Grayson's face when he read the news. Across town, at Westbridge Capital's headquarters, the morning meeting was already spiraling into chaos. Elliot stormed into the executive boardroom, his face red with frustration. Can someone explain to me what the hell is happening? A junior analyst nervously adjusted his tie. Sir, we just lost 3 of our biggest clients overnight, and more are calling in. Miranda Patel from HR sat stiffly, scrolling through her tablet, her face pale. We're getting calls from investors. They're worried about long-term stability. Elliot clenched his jaw. Who are they moving to? Silence. Then, one of the senior partners hesitated before finally answering. Lockwood Partners. And Rebecca Sinclair's leading the transition. Boom. The weight of those words landed like an earthquake. Elliot's expression darkened. She planned this. She had this in place before we even fired her. The realization sent a shiver through the room. Marjorie, the chief operating officer, ran a shaky hand through her hair. How the hell did we not see this coming? Meanwhile, Becca was hosting a private executive brunch at the Four Seasons, where over a dozen key clients from her Westbridge days were sitting across from her, listening intently. She smiled, looking around the table at some of the wealthiest and most influential investors on Wall Street. "Westbridge was great while it lasted," she said smoothly, "but I think we all know that they've lost their edge." Several clients nodded in agreement. "What we're offering at Lockwood," she continued, "is not just the same level of strategy, but an even greater commitment to personalized high-return investments." A well-known hedge fund manager, Mr. Calloway, leaned forward. "I trust your judgment, Rebecca. That's why I'm here." She nodded, her confidence radiating through the room. The deal was already sealed, but this meeting? This was just a final formality. By the end of the brunch, every single client at that table had signed a transition contract. By 11 a.m., the situation at Westbridge had gone from bad to catastrophic. Their stock had plunged 9% since the market opened. Not only had they lost billions in assets under management, but rumors were spreading that Westbridge was unstable. Investors hated instability, and now the media was having a field day. Financial News Network. Rebecca Sinclair's bold move, a power play that's reshaping Wall Street. The Wall Street Journal. Westbridge Capital faces major client exodus. What went wrong? Bloomberg. Sinclair strikes back. The woman who built Westbridge now becomes its biggest threat. By 1 p.m., analysts were downgrading Westbridge's rating, citing loss of leadership stability. Elliot was losing control. And Becca? She was watching the empire she built collapse in real time, knowing she was the one who made it happen. At 2:30 p.m., Becca's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Elliot Grayson. Her lips curled into a satisfied smirk. She waited for it to ring 3 more times before picking up. "Elliot," she said smoothly, "to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" His voice was tight with frustration. "Becca, we need to talk." She took a sip of her coffee. "About what, exactly?" "You know damn well what." She let the silence stretch, letting him stew in his own desperation. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Look," he said, forcing his tone to remain even, "I know things ended poorly between us, but—" "Oh, you mean when you fired me after 20 years of dedication?" she interrupted. Elliot flinched. "Yes, that." Becca pretended to think for a moment. "I seem to recall you telling me you wanted fresh perspectives. So why do you sound so worried?" "Enough with the games, Becca," he snapped. "Westbridge is bleeding. You made your point. But if you're willing to come back, we can discuss." She laughed. And not just a small chuckle, a full, unapologetic laugh. "Oh, Elliot," she sighed, still grinning. "I would rather set foot in Times Square wearing nothing but a sandwich board before I work for you again." A tense silence stretched between them. "Enjoy the rest of your day, Elliot," she said sweetly before hanging up. Click. She tossed her phone onto the desk and leaned back, enjoying the sweet taste of victory. By the time markets closed, Westbridge's stock had dropped 14%. Their board was in emergency meetings, and clients were still withdrawing their accounts. At 5 p.m., a breaking news headline hit. Westbridge CEO Elliot Grayson to step down amidst firm's worst quarter in a decade. Becca smirked as she read the article. The king had fallen, and she had been the one to take his crown. Becca didn't just get revenge, she built something better. She didn't waste time fighting for scraps. She created an empire of her own. As she poured herself a glass of wine, she thought back to the moment they fired her. They had believed they were getting rid of her. Instead, they had given her the greatest opportunity of her career, and by the time they realized it was far too late. By Tuesday morning, the tremors that Becca had sent through Westbridge Capital had turned into a full-blown earthquake. Inside Lockwood Partners headquarters, Becca sipped her morning coffee, her phone buzzing with updates every few minutes. Client transfers, new business deals, industry reactions. She glanced out of her corner office window, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. It was only a matter of time before Westbridge made their next desperate move. And sure enough, her assistant knocked on the door. "Rebecca," she said, barely hiding a grin, "you have a visitor." Becca smirked. "Let me guess. Someone from Westbridge?" Her assistant nodded. "Elliot Grayson's assistant called. He's here to see you." Becca exhaled slowly, setting down her coffee. She had been expecting this. "Send him in," she said, leaning back in her chair, prepared for the performance of a lifetime. Elliot walked into her office, dressed in his usual expensive suit, but for the first time in years, he looked uncertain. The once powerful CEO of Westbridge Capital was now a man scrambling for control. Becca folded her hands on her desk and gave him a deliberately polite smile. "Elliot," she said smoothly, "what a surprise." He exhaled, tugging at his collar as he took a seat. "I won't waste time," he said, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. "Good," she replied. "Neither will I." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "We need to find a way to fix this," he started, choosing his words carefully. "Westbridge is in a vulnerable position, but we can still recover. You and I both know that." Becca just tilted her head, letting the silence stretch. Elliot took that as an opportunity to pitch his real offer. "Come back," he said. Becca arched a brow. "Excuse me?" He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "I know you're enjoying your little victory lap," he said with forced patience. "But let's be real, Becca. You built Westbridge just as much as I did." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, Elliot. I built Westbridge while you took the credit." His face hardened. "Becca." She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me guess," she said. "You want me to come back and fix everything? Smooth things over with clients? Stabilize the company so the board doesn't fire you?" He pressed his lips together, clearly gritting his teeth. "Look, if you're willing to negotiate," he said, forcing a tight-lipped smile, "there's a place for you at Westbridge again. A leadership role. Hell, maybe even co-CEO. He paused, then added, "That's what you wanted, isn't it? The recognition you never got. Well, here it is." Becca leaned back, folding her arms, and then she smiled, the kind of smile that sent shivers down people's spines. "Oh, Elliot," she said sweetly. "You still don't get it, do you?" His expression shifted slightly, uncertainty creeping in. "What don't I get?" he asked. Becca stood up, walking toward the large window overlooking the city. Then she turned back to face him. "I don't want Westbridge," she said calmly. Elliot blinked. "What?" "I don't want it," she repeated. Elliot looked completely thrown off. But you... She cut him off with a sharp look. You thought I was fighting for your approval? For a seat at your table? She shook her head, chuckling softly. No, Elliot. I was never fighting for that. She walked back to her desk and picked up a single folder. I fought for my legacy, she said, placing the folder in front of him. Elliot hesitated, then flipped it open. His face drained of color. Inside was a list of every major Westbridge client that had moved to Lockwood in the last 48 hours, all with Becca's signature on their transition agreements. She watched as reality sank in for him. His hands tightened around the edges of the folder. You, he started, but his voice betrayed his panic. I didn't take Westbridge from you, Elliot, she said with a quiet smirk. I took everything that made it valuable. Elliot snapped the folder shut, shoving it toward her. This isn't over, he said, his voice low with fury. Becca raised a mocking brow. Are you sure? He stood up abruptly, buttoning his jacket. Westbridge will recover, he hissed. We'll come back stronger. Becca merely shrugged. Maybe, she said lightly, but you won't be there to see it. Elliot froze mid-step, turning back. What? She sat down at her desk, crossing one leg over the other. I know something you don't, she mused, enjoying this far too much. She slowly reached for her phone and tapped the screen. A breaking news alert flashed across the display. Elliot's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer to read it. Breaking. Westbridge Capital's board considers CEO shakeup amidst mass client exodus. Elliot's entire body stiffened. They're discussing your removal, Elliot. She set her phone down and looked him dead in the eye. They don't care about loyalty. They care about the bottom line. And you? You're now a liability. His jaw clenched so hard it could have cracked. You think you've won, he said through gritted teeth. Becca smiled, completely at ease. Elliot, she said sweetly, I don't think I've won. I know I have. He stormed out of her office, slamming the door behind him. Her assistant peeked in a few moments later, smirking. Well, Becca leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. He's finished. Her assistant grinned. Good. By Wednesday morning, the final nail in the coffin came. Westbridge's board voted to remove Elliot as CEO. The industry exploded with speculation. And Becca. She was already 10 steps ahead. At noon, she walked into a conference room filled with eager investors and industry leaders, all waiting for her next move. She smiled, stepping up to the podium. Let's talk about the future. And just like that, she closed the book on Westbridge Capital. Elliot was history. Becca was the future. By Thursday morning, the fallout from Westbridge Capital's collapse was everywhere. News outlets were buzzing about Elliot Grayson's sudden removal as CEO. Stockholders were furious. Clients were still leaving. Employees were jumping ship. And Becca, she was already miles ahead. She sat in her office at Lockwood Partners, sipping her morning coffee as her assistant handed her the latest reports. Westbridge's shares are down another 12% since the board's announcement, her assistant noted, setting a printed report on her desk. Becca didn't even blink. Expected. Her assistant smirked, shaking her head. They're in full-blown panic mode. Becca simply sipped her coffee, satisfied. Let's see how much lower it can go. By Friday afternoon, the inevitable happened. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the name on the screen. Westbridge Capital. Becca smirked, letting the phone ring for a few moments before answering. Rebecca Callahan. There was a heavy pause on the other end, then a familiar voice. "Rebecca, this is Richard Donovan." Becca leaned back in her chair, recognizing the name instantly. Richard was Westbridge's newly appointed interim CEO, a seasoned veteran brought in to stabilize the absolute disaster Elliot had left behind. "I was hoping we could schedule a meeting," Richard continued carefully. "Westbridge is looking to rebuild relationships." Becca chuckled softly. "Is that what we're calling it?" She could hear Richard exhale sharply. "We'd like to discuss a partnership," he said, "one that benefits both sides." Becca tilted her head. Partnership. Westbridge was scrambling. They knew they couldn't recover without her network, her clients, her influence. And now, they were begging. "How interesting," she mused. "Let me get this straight, Richard. Westbridge cuts me out after 15 years, assumes I'm disposable, and now that it's falling apart, you want my help?" Richard hesitated. "I won't pretend the company handled things well." Becca's smile widened. "No, you won't," she said smoothly, "because you and I both know this wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice." A long silence stretched between them. Then Richard sighed. "Rebecca, Westbridge isn't the same without you. We need someone like you to help fix this." Becca laughed softly, shaking her head. "Richard," she said, her voice calm and deadly, "Westbridge doesn't need someone like me. It needs me. And the problem is, I don't need Westbridge." Richard inhaled sharply. "Rebecca, just—" She didn't let him finish. "Send over your proposal. I'll take a look." And with that, she ended the call. She wasn't saying yes. She was making them sweat. By Monday morning, a formal proposal from Westbridge landed in her inbox. She scanned the document while stirring her coffee, her eyes narrowing at the desperate terms they were offering. A full partnership, a board seat, a multi-million-dollar compensation package. Westbridge was willing to do anything to bring her back. She sighed, amused. They still didn't understand. This wasn't about money. It was about power. Her phone buzzed. Another call from Richard. This time, she answered with mock impatience. "Richard," she said, "didn't I say I'd take a look?" "I wanted to follow up personally," he replied, his voice tight with stress. Becca could practically hear the pressure weighing down on him. "We're serious about making things right," he continued. "Westbridge can't afford to lose you to Lockwood. Come back, and you'll have more power than ever." Becca leaned back, her fingers tapping against her desk. And then she asked the one question Richard wasn't ready for. "Tell me, Richard," she mused, "what happens if I say no?" The silence was deafening. Then, after a long pause, Richard sighed. "I suppose we'll have to find another way to survive." Becca smirked. "Best of luck with that." Then she hung up. And just like that, Westbridge was dead to her. By Tuesday, Westbridge's stock continued to plummet. Meanwhile, at Lockwood Partners, Becca was thriving. She finalized 3 new deals, each one bringing Westbridge's former clients under her umbrella. At 3 p.m., her team gathered in the boardroom for their monthly strategy meeting. As Becca walked in, she saw them waiting eagerly, their eyes filled with anticipation and respect. She smiled, setting her folder on the table. "All right," she said, "let's talk about the future." Her team leaned in, hanging onto her every word. And in that moment, Becca knew. She hadn't just won. She had built something better. Westbridge had been her past. Lockwood? This was her empire. The story of Becca Callahan in AH-8 teaches a powerful lesson about knowing your value and refusing to settle for less. Too often, people dedicate years, sometimes decades, to companies, relationships, or situations that fail to recognize their worth. They assume loyalty and hard work will be enough, only to be discarded when they're deemed no longer necessary. But Becca's journey shows us that true power lies in preparation, strategy, and self-belief. Instead of reacting emotionally when she was pushed out, she anticipated the betrayal, planned ahead, and took control of her own narrative. She didn't fight for a seat at a table that never valued her. She built her own empire instead. This is a reminder that you are not defined by the validation of others, whether in your career, personal relationships, or any other aspect of life. Never let someone else dictate your worth. Instead, invest in yourself, cultivate your skills, and always have a backup plan. Success is not about revenge. It's about thriving on your own terms. When you recognize your own value, you stop begging for opportunities and start creating them.